There are a few things better than getting cozy with a loved one and a large bucket of popcorn on a winter's evening, and then watching the bodies of innocent victims be torn asunder. You know, maimed, chewed, mutilated, it's all heartwarming stuff. And with plenty of choice in today's new horror golden age, zombie flicks in particular are 10 a penny. But there are some that we strongly wrote off before we even saw them, you know, those that seemingly had everything going against them on paper, but turned out to actually be surprisingly effective when you sat down to watch them. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 zombie horror movies that have no right being this good. Number 10, Night of the Living Dead, 1990. Kicking things off with a movie that many might have written off as doomed simply by association, Night of the Living Dead in 1990 is way better than it has any right to be. Unfortunately, George A. Romero's Dead series has seen an overwhelming amount of remakes and spiritual successes that have besmirched its good name. But Night of the Living Dead in 1990 was not capitalized on by a bunch of chances, no. This actually had involvement from Romero himself, who drafted in his longtime filmmaking partner Tom Savini to direct. And while undeniably a special effects maestro, was not guaranteed to succeed in this other field. Savini puts in a solid effort, mostly selling the threat of these updated zombies, while the changes to Barbara's character in particular make her much more compelling than her original counterpart, with an actual input in the story this time around. Number 9, One Cut of the Dead. Okay, so, One Cut of the Dead should not work and is in a way technically not even really a zombie movie. That's because what starts out as a seemingly low-budget horror movie about a filmmaking crew that gets attacked by real zombies while they're making a fake zombie film ultimately reveals itself to have a hidden third layer. That's because it then reveals that what we're actually watching is really a filmmaking team making a movie about a zombie apocalypse that occurs while a movie team is filming a movie about a zombie apocalypse. Still with me? Well, with a structure like that, one cut has to be executed, ironically if you've seen the flick yourself, perfectly in order to maximize the impact of its twists. One thing's for sure, we won't get a movie like One Cut of the Dead again anytime soon. Number 8, Anna and the Apocalypse. A Christmas musical set in Scotland during a zombie apocalypse. Yeah, it's no surprise that Anna and the Apocalypse was a hard sell for many horror fans, hell, myself included. Even when the trailer dropped, it was easy to write this off as a corny genre experiment without the horror chops or catchy hooks to succeed in either of the genres that it was blending. With a set of likable characters, mainly teenagers on the cusp of graduation, and a surprisingly strong sense of horror running through it, the movie remains compelling for its runtime. The songs are charming, the stakes are surprisingly high, and while it's not a masterpiece by any means, it is a quintessential pick for a list like this, because the disparate parts have no right being this good, but when brought together like this, they absolutely are. Number 7, The Battery. The Battery, admittedly, is a movie I have only seen once back when it came out in 2012, but it's testament to its impact that I genuinely still regularly think about it over a decade later. Which is kinda crazy considering we've had so many bigger and more high-profile zombie films since then. What makes that even better as well is that The Battery is a passion project through and through. A micro-budget horror made for a mere $6,000 that sees two friends trying to survive on the road during a zombie apocalypse. With a budget like that, don't expect heart-stopping action and big set pieces, but The Battery does spend its money wisely, keeping the zombie threat real while more importantly showing the effect it's having on our two characters. And this is a character study through and through, showing the highs and lows, let's face it, mostly lows, but I was trying to be kind, of their growing friction as they try to navigate this impossible scenario. With a unique and harrowing final reel, The Battery is proof that as long as you've got an interesting idea and intriguing characters, anyone can make a good zombie movie. Number 6, Dead Snow. Norwegian horror Dead Snow could have been one of those movies that has a great premise, yes, that gets people talking at parties, but doesn't actually result in an amazing full 90 minutes of cinema. Following a group of friends who cozy up in a cabin only to accidentally find themselves on the receiving end of the wrath of a group of Nazi zombies, this comedy horror thankfully has the chops to live up to its mad premise. Featuring chainsaws, heavy weaponry, and plenty of inventive death scenes, Dead Snow is far from a shameless cash-in on the Nazi zombies trend popularized by Call of Duty in the late 2000s and early 2010s. No, there's real filmmaking craft on display here, almost as if the filmmakers themselves are trying to prove any naysayers wrong who may think this is just a corny one-trick pony. It might not be Shakespeare, but hey, to my knowledge, he never made a good zombie story that I know of. But what Dead Snow lacks in substance, it more than makes up for in pure cacophonous fun, all wrapped in the B-movie thrills of blood, guts, and ultraviolence. Number 5, Maggie. 2015's Maggie begins with an already turned victim. After his daughter Maggie is infected with the zombie virus, it's up to Wade, played by freaking Arnold Schwarzenegger, to find a way to save her. A horror drama, Maggie looks at all the heartbreaking ways in which a zombie apocalypse could unite and tear a family apart. Now, the point of casting Schwarzenegger in the role wasn't to trade on his action movie pedigree, but rather to subvert expectations. Instead, casting him in a more human, emotion-driven role as a desperate father. That in itself is a risk, as was hiring first-time movie director Henry Hobson to guide this star. And yet, somehow, these strange elements come together for a harrowing and poignant tale. It's not quite a Logan or a Pig, but it's way better than it could have been. Number 4, Shaun of the Dead. Arriving in cinemas the same year as Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, which may or may not be on this list, no spoilers, you could have been forgiven, and many were, for thinking that Shaun of the Dead was merely a cynical attempt to send up what was set to be one of the decade's most popular zombie flicks. But Edgar Wright's rom-com transcends any prejudgment and proved the big screen talent that had been percolating through Edgar Wright while he worked away on a string of cult classic comedy TV shows. You probably know of the story by now. Likeable loser Shaun tries to shield his loved ones from a zombie apocalypse by hiding in a pub that may or may not have a functioning gun above the bar. Shaun of the Dead is such a horror staple today to ever think of it as a risk, or something that people were initially skeptical of, but it's surprising just how little faith people had in this flick. Number 3, Resident Evil. Rarely do the phrases video game adaptation and good movie sit comfortably together. You've got director Paul W.S. Anderson at the helm, a man with a spotty track record to say the least, a story that's only loosely based on the video games with none of the iconic characters from the game, a way more pronounced action focus, a dodgy CGI killer AI, and a moment where our hero Matrix-style bounces off a wall and kicks a zombie dog in the head. But it's actually kind of because of these elements, not in spite of them, that the original Resident Evil remains a rollicking good time. Yeah, it won't satisfy if you're looking for an authentic adaptation of the games, but as its own beast, it does bring the scares, the early 2000s sheen, a kick-ass hero in Milla Jovovich's Alice, and an effective secret laboratory setting that keeps the action interesting. Number 2, Planet Terror. B-movie passion project reminiscent of grindhouse exploitation cinema is the kind of phrase that makes film financiers wet the bed, and yet that's precisely what Robert Rodriguez managed to push through production back in 2007. Guided by the overwhelming popularity of collaborator Quentin Tarantino, who himself directed Death Proof, this film's double feature companion piece, Rodriguez was able to helm and release a flick that in other circumstances would never have seen the light of day. Especially at the time, where watered-down studio-mandated horror was king, nothing about this kitschy film, even though it was underscored by a formidable cast, including Rose McGowan, Michael Biehn, and Josh Brolin, should have worked, never mind being this good. This is a flick that turns everything up to 11, including the grain on the picture, by the way. You've got machine gun legs, you got priests with shotguns, melting faces, exploding heads, you name it, Planet Terror probably has it. It's grainy, it's gory, and it's one hell of a wild ride that simply should not exist. Number 1, Dawn of the Dead, 2004. Nowadays, a zombie blockbuster directed by Zack Snyder and written by James Gunn would be enough to drum up a $200 million budget and probably the biggest A-list stars around. But back in 2004, when Dawn of the Dead released, things were different. In fact, this remake was Snyder's theatrical debut, and nobody had any idea what to expect from him in terms of style, which is kinda crazy considering how well known his signature is today. Likewise, James Gunn was not the superhero maestro he's respected as today, nor was he even the gonzo genre favorite that he morphed into across the late 2000s. It's no surprise that many fans assumed the worst with Dawn of the Dead, thinking that one of the best zombie movies of all time was being handed over to a bunch of amateurs. And yet, while not as good as the original, this 2004 remake proved to be a total hit. Rather than ape Romero's style, this is a Zack Snyder flick through and through, for better or worse, introducing more action, more slow-mo, more grotesque, grimy set pieces, and more needle drops than the original. With fast zombies, kinetic action, and likable heroes, this was a distinctly modern take on the zombie genre, and one that still resonates with fans today. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any other zombie flicks that you wrote off that turned out to be pretty incredible that you can think of that I've missed off here? Let me know. And while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.